All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining. Super excited to be here on this awesome day. And here's the thing. Yes, I have a green screen and that's not my actual window. Terrence, I know if there was moving water, I'd be the man. Awesome. So look, everybody, here's the cool thing about today. I'm super honored to be here as the moderator for this panel and on a topic that is, I think, critically important to any company's success. The direct link between employee experience and customer experience. And of course, I am surrounded by three superstars. Let's start off with Chia Cole, who's the Senior Consumer Service Operations Manager with GE Appliances. Super excited to have you. Thanks for joining. We also have Terrence Hyman, who's the Outbound Sales Strategy and Program Manager for Cox Communications. See if I learned how to speak. Thanks for joining. I know this is a super passionate topic for you, so I'm excited to have you. And of course, for those of you who don't know Sam, and if you don't know Sam, don't admit it out loud. Sam Folletta, who's the CEO of Incept. Now, if you don't know about Incept, they are an outsourced CX solution provider headquartered in Ohio. He's also, again, for those of you who don't know, the chair of the National Board of Directors for PACE. Now, here's the thing about Incept, and if you know anything about me and the podcasts that I have with First Contact, Stories of the Call Center, and the webinar series, mental health initiatives is super important to Incept and to Sam. And so that's also why they've been named one of the top places to be workplace-wise in the Northeast Ohio 10 times in a row. So congrats and kudos to Sam and his group and everyone who's been part of that. So let's kind of hop into this topic. One of the things that we all have to really just align on right off the bat is there a direct link between employee experience and customer experience? So Chi, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there is absolutely a direct link between the customer experience and the employee experience. It's almost like happy wife, happy life. Like, you have happy employees, engaged employees, then you tend to have a happier consumer base because that energy is being passed along to your consumer. So it starts with your employees. Focus on your employees, they will in turn focus on your consumer.
Totally agree. And I know, Terrence, you got some strong thoughts on this. What do you got?
Yeah, listen, I mean, that was a great, reference. Happy wife, happy life, right? Because ultimately the customer is the most important, right? I mean, without the customer, why are we here? So we must show up. I think I saw someone paying attitude in the chat box, and absolutely attitude and energy, right? Professionalism. The agent represents the brand. And so, ultimately, perception is reality. So we have to recruit and get it right so that we can represent properly on every call, every time, right? So to answer your question, yes, there's a direct correlation.
So Terrence, Chia, you obviously work for the end enterprise, right? GE Appliances, Cox, you work with the end customer. Sam, you have another perspective, right? You come in, you have the end customer as your customer, and then their end customers also in that moment, your customer. Where do you see yourself in that interaction?
Yeah, so to validate both of their points, I think it's kind of intuitive, but then also quantified. So whether it's Gallup or Forrester or Gartner or McKinsey, there's a million studies, and if anybody wants to Google them to see the direct correlation, we kind of give you all of the numbers, but it's also as intuitive as happy wife, happy life. If your people are engaged, they're going to do good work. So from our version, it really just adds an extra layer of what does engaged look like to the brand that we represent, and how do you kind of manage multiple layers of that engagement. Some people have a very serious persona, some have a playful persona, some are incredibly metric driven, some are mostly metric driven, but have a little room to play. So I think we kind of live by all of the same patterns and just have to customize those at the individual partnership level to kind of reflect what really is the brand of the entity that we support.
So let's talk about engagement, right? Let's step back for a minute and we say the happy wife, happy life, the ultimate reason we're here is the customer, right? But to serve that customer, we kind of also have to look at that saying, well, the first customer is really your employee, right? if you don't have a happy customer, if they're not prepared for success, if they're not ready to do all the things that you just outlined, Sam, then you really can't do all the rest. So what are your thoughts on how do you create engagement then with the employee and them being truly your first customer so you can get to that outcome of servicing the end customer? So Terrence, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, no, you are spot on. The employee is a customer as well, right? And as a manager, a leader, the employee is my customer. And so, it starts with support, right? They have to feel supported. They have to feel like they are growing. They have to feel as if their voice is being heard. I think, we're in a culture right now, the cancel culture, right? Where, people just can kind of fly off the handle, right? And kind of just say what they want. So I think communication is key right now. And so having clear lines of communication in our world, feedback is extremely important. So providing feedback frequently so that people know their status, know how to grow, and feel that they're growing, I think makes a tremendous difference. I mean, recognition, right, goes a long way. I'm still amazed to this day how far balloons with grown people, because recognition is recognition, right? And so when you think of engagement and how to service the employee as a customer, that's my mindset, right? It's support and it's growth. They have to feel it.
Yeah, well, considering all of our heads are nodding, and probably if we saw the audience, their heads nodding too. So we all disagree with you, Terrence. Horrible advice. Don't listen to it. No, but of course, with that said, Shia, obviously in previous conversations we've had, you have some strong thoughts as well. I mean, how do you drive that engagement outside of what Terrence is saying?
And in our previous conversations, my keyword was engagement. That's where it starts. And it starts at onboarding. So you have to provide a good onboarding experience, a good training experience, and it has to be continuous. You can't bring an employee on board and kind of drop them off. You have to stay engaged. You have to have coaching sessions. You have to have recognition. You have to give them a voice. So we need to hear from our employees. What do you need from us? What do you need us to do more of? Stop doing, keep doing. I think engagement is that main driver. And that's when the employee becomes the customer first. Treat them with that same reverence that you treat your customers. We go after our customers. We want their business. We have to go after our employees. We want them to stay. So we have to engage them in that same way.
Totally makes sense. And I mean, Sam, from your perspective, obviously you're servicing a lot of different enterprises that all have their end customers. How do you keep your staff engaged or help them become engaged to be able to service the needs of all the customers?
Yeah, I think it's almost two different questions. There was the world before COVID and the world since.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little cliche, but I think as an industry, we had gotten really good at engagement within the call center environment, and some had expanded to engagement of the whole employee. But there were a lot of assumptions that were previously based on they would leave their home environment and come to your facility. It was a safe place for a lot of people. It was a supportive place. It was, well, now that whole line has blurred. So a lot of people are in the same environment that maybe presents stress, maybe creates anxiety, maybe adds depression. They're not getting out as social. So it's the difference between kind of managing the work employee, which I'm calling pre-COVID, and managing the whole employee, whether they have a disruption in their home, whether it's children in school, whether it's a sickness in their extended family. The proximity of what's happening in all of our employees' lives are so much closer to us now that my sense, or at least what we're struggling through, is what I think is wonderful for society in general, which is, the employees have a lot of the power now. They have the ability to choose and go where they want. I think for society as a whole, that's a great thing. For employers, it's really challenging to try to figure out kind of where is the line, right? How do I go as far as I need to help manage the whole employee, but not so far that I create a relationship that is beyond what's expected of the workplace. So I think we're all kind of trying to figure that out together and figuring out like, how do I support you as the person, which will make you as the employer better, which will make the customer experience better.
Yeah. So as we kind of dissect that, right, and we start looking at that pre-COVID right now, and then what does the future hold? There are some universal things about dissatisfaction, right? Things that I think we said on the positive side is recognition, right? We said, you got to recognize things, have communication, but any other key drivers that when we sit here and say, what drives the dissatisfaction? Do you measure that? Do you monitor that? How do you address that when you know it, or do you not know it? Any thoughts on that part of it? And so Sam, we'll just start from you there, and then we can kind of go to Terrence from there on that.
Yeah, I think the key part of what you just said is do you know it, right? So the systems and the organizations that were built with good feedback mechanisms, or we're having good two-way conversations, are much further ahead because they're getting transparent feedback. Probably the most specific one that I can point to has been around flexibility, right? As an industry, we need people in a specific place at a specific time. And that is really competing with the personal conflicts of, but I have this other thing I have to be at with another time. So I think structurally, it's how are you getting that feedback and are you listening to it? And then maybe the second piece is, how actively are you reassessing things that were previously unquestioned, right? This is our attendance policy. The attendance policy probably doesn't apply anymore, or the raise criteria, or so it's really kind of reevaluating the structure. But like you said at the beginning, it all depends on how well are you listening and how active is that feedback getting to you.
Terrence, you're just like chomping at the bit.
No, I'm writing as well, right? I mean, I'm a student always. Whether I'm on a panel or not, I'm a student always. And Sam, I totally agree. Something came, as we were talking earlier, just about some of the challenges, and I'm thinking about just the shift. Actually, Sam, you talked about the choices that, people have now in the workplace, right? Those choices are causing people to move around. People are moving industries, they're trying new things. People are moving, out of industries, out of workforce altogether, right? We have a whole new onslaught of entrepreneurs. It's been predicted that 40% of today's workforce will be entrepreneurs in a few years, right? They're leaving the workforce altogether. What are we to do? And so, Sam, I think you were spot on when you said managing the whole person without going overboard, right? It's not business as usual. If we're going to manage our attrition, right? Attrition that is like crazy right now. I mean, recruiting is nuts. We can't get quality people anymore, right? So we've had to kind of zoom out and some people who are recruiting lots of people know what I'm saying, but it's watered down. It's watered down because the experience have gone on to do other things at a higher rate. That's the facts. Now we have people that we have to coach up and we have to handle differently. So Sam, I thought you were spot on when you said, how do we manage them in a different way that makes them want to feel like they belong, right? Coach them to where they need to be, and ultimately they stay. Because what's the point of the investment if they don't stay, right? And so a lot in that, but when you talk about the changes, man, just a plethora of changes, but I think we're doing really well under the circumstances because 2 years ago, I would have said no work at home ever in my path forward. Just didn't turn out that way.
Best laid plans.
Well,
everybody has a plan until they get punched.
Yeah. Well, look, we've talked about change being a disruptor and a necessary thing, right? Is you learn from change, you adapt, and you put yourself in positions to grow, hopefully through change. So Chia, we talked about this as well. And so I know you have some ideas around change, but when it comes to what we just talked about, what are your thoughts on it?
So I think as we all mentioned, the past almost 2 years had kind of thrown us in like this huge experiment, right? So for us that were not prepared to go into a pandemic, and who is, by the way, prepared for a pandemic, we had to look at things differently. We had to look at our coaching models differently. We had to look at our engagement models differently, our training models. And one thing that I learned, and I think Terrence hit on it, was I had to engage more with my employees. So I used to have, these bi-weekly or further out one-on-ones. I had to start talking to them weekly, keeping them engaged, setting up those engagement moments with the team, having more team meetings, asking people plain and simple, how are you doing? Because that went a long way in the past 2 years where our employees were at home and isolated, and they were no longer in the office and having just that water cooler talk. So they didn't necessarily have people around. There are some people that have pets and children, and so the whole dynamic changed. So I think it's just important when we talk about engagement and disengagement, the more engaged employees were happier when they were engaged. I'm gonna keep using that word. Is when we engaged them, when we just had basic conversations with them about growth, where do they want to go, where do they want to see themselves, how could we help them out during this time. Times have changed now. There's more flexibility. We can offer more flexibility. We can offer more opportunities. So talking to them, laying out a plan, and holding ourselves and them accountable to moving towards it. So I think it was just that higher level of engagement, conversation that we had to learn to do in a remote environment.
So there's a lot there to unpack, but Terrence, I think you have something to say.
Yeah. I'll just add on to that, right? I mean, for me, I've challenged leaders across the various sites that I'm responsible for is, we also have to pause and just forget about the numbers. Pause and forget about, the accountability sometimes, because I think I heard someone mention mental health, right? I mean, the isolation has driven a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, things that we don't normally talk about, things that people aren't even comfortable talking about, right? So when she speaks of engagement, that could be a very generalized term, but it's been a deeper level of engagement from my perspective, right? When you have to really ask, how are your children doing? People have died. That's the reality. People have lost loved ones. I have lost a loved one. And so it's real. And so in the midst of accountability and performance management, we have to pause and think about the human beings, right? I mean, we focus on doing, but we are humans that are being, right? I've leaned into that a little bit more, since the last couple of sessions.
Well, let's expand a little bit on that, only on the note that from the conversations I've had in the past with Sam, right, around mental health, around specifically some of the things that for many people are taboo. It's a sign of weakness to talk about difficulties at home, things that are challenging for you. And to not embrace that and to make it a safe place for people to have those opportunities, I think also comes with the culture of the company, right? The leadership of that company. And we all say we don't fire companies that we work with, we fire the bosses that we work for, right? So a lot of times it's from the top all the way down of how do we approach people where they are, right? We talk about it all the time with our customer, right? Meeting our customer where they are, where they want to be, when they want us to be, that via the medium that they want us to be. I think the same idea when we go back to the employee. If they're our first customer, how do we do that with them? So from a mental health standpoint, I know, Sam, you have some great things that you've done at Inset. Share with everybody some of those things, and for us to be able to understand what kind of things did you do around mental health, and what are the things that you could do going forward that helped from what you did?
Sure. Yeah. So pre-COVID, we had put in a lot of work, primarily on just reducing the stigma, right? So we had Mental Health Awareness Month. We talked about it openly. We actually have one specific employee who once a week does a check-in in our corporate communication channel that says, like, here's a series of colors that indicate like where you're at. And it, it just has the choices like, I'm doing great, I'm doing okay, but could use some encouragement, all the way down to like, I'm not doing well, somebody reach out. So the fact that that had been going on for some period of time created awareness. I'll kind of summarize shortly. We actually moved as far as bringing an in-house counselor in that was provided by the business to say, like, you have a coach for your work. In a lot of places you have coaches, whether it's a pastor or somebody you talk to about your faith, like, why not a coach for your personal well-being? So we brought that relationship kind of into play. And we just support that idea, which is, everybody varies. You're never always perfect. And when you're not perfect, you should feel comfortable getting help the way you would for your physical health. And we just repeat that a lot is probably the oversimplified way to do it. The one that has made it the most complicated in COVID, and I struggle with this today, but we're kind of working our way through it, is you see a lot of this feedback that says, like, we've asked our employee what their preference is, and it has been work from home. And I think universally, we kind of saw, like, we could execute the job, we were more efficient. Where we're struggling today is what's most effective for an individual is not always, and sometimes never, is what's most effective for a community. And how do you parse apart that? Because we never want to say, like, we hear your opinion and we don't trust that it's the right thing. But in our measurements, we're seeing engagement go down. We're seeing mental health and awareness go, like, people's preference is to be at home. But I was home for 15 months and I got lethargic and disconnected. And when I came back in, that changed. But if you would have asked me, it was my preference. So kind of oversimplified, there is a difference between what is your preference and what's most effective. And we know that exercise is healthier, it is harder. So if you ask me my preference, it is taco and donuts. If you said what is more effective, it is a better health routine. So I think that's probably the easiest way to simplify it, is like, we're really struggling with this idea of preference versus effectiveness. And what is our role in kind of choosing what do we get to say about somebody's engagement level if they're saying, like, no, I'm fine. But if the observation is that's not really what's best for you, where does the organization sit in that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there and a lot of head shaking. So I'm sure there is elsewhere. You got any thoughts on this, Terrence?
No, I just think he's spot on, right? I mean, just the idea that, they've provided a wellness coach, right, to support individuals, or just the idea around that is just spot on. I mean, don't want to go too much down that path. I'm passionate about mental health, self-care in general. I just don't think we take enough time for ourselves overall. But the anxiety, the depression piece, he just said preference. Yes, many people thought they wanted to work from home until they got stuck there for almost 2 years, right? Lethargic, right? There have been so many issues and ailments that we have experienced that we are unaware of, right? And so I think just great call outs.
Gia, anything to add on that?
Really, no. I think, listening to Sam, I was just like, I wish we had something like that. Both of you guys made really great points, and I think I have some takeaways. Because what we're struggling right now in my company with how to bring people back. Do we bring people back? And it is that preference, and we're hearing, largely, very loudly, that employees want to remain at home. But I think we all know from a business standpoint, at least not 100%, we're seeing is not the best way to go because of productivity, engagement, disengagement. Like, we see, people are getting disengaged. It's 2 years. And I think we're starting to live our lives at home, instead of being focused on the business. And then you being in the business as long as I have and managing people, you start to feel when those mental health challenges come up. And that's also a very sensitive topic. And in my environment, we can only kind of offer EAP. But I really love that how Sam's organization is taking it a step further. And I would love to see that in our organization.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Sam.
I just wanted to add one more thing, because I think it's a little bit of the trap we're collectively caught in. I think we saw all of the pros from the pandemic very early on, right? Our efficiency rates were good. Attendance was high because people didn't have commuting issues, but all of the cons are yet to be determined or are harder to understand. So I think there was kind of this prevalence of, oh, this is a good thing. Look, we can operate the business. We have a larger labor pool. But how do you measure disconnection? How do you measure culture? How do you measure community? And those are the things that I'm so glad we're having this session about, because like everybody's starting to see some of that fray a little bit. And I think the original version of just like we averted the crisis now is like the frog in the boiling water. That's everybody feels it getting a little hotter, but there's no like impetus for major action. But the consequences now are starting to come out a little bit clear, and they're just creeping up on us a bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting, some of the points, Terrence, you made earlier around having a career path, having a, how do you keep them once you're there and you made that investment? And I think as you see, yeah, you have a much larger pool, but sometimes that larger pool has less qualified candidates. Maybe the fact that they have 5 other opportunities they can go to tomorrow, that their investment's really not that high. They didn't have to commute to your office. They didn't spend a bunch of time and train there. They maybe were at home or doing otherwise, and they can just find the next job, right? There was a lot of people in the pandemic prior that were fearful of change, right? They were just like, I've been in this job for a long time. I've known this one craft for a long time. I don't know if I'm ready to dive to someone else. But when that broke and people were just like, I don't have a choice. This is what has to happen to survive. I think there's a large pool of people that are like, this doesn't work for me. I'm out. I start day 1. I have no intention of being here on day 2. I'm going to go do something else. So we talk about engagement for people that are there already. We talk about onboarding and training, like how do you get that person ready for success? I've spent all this time and effort, and now I'm going to hopefully make them into this productive person that has a future here. Have you seen in the pandemic or even otherwise things that you're struggling or things that are things you implement and you see dividends already on? How do you now embed this new way of making sure that investment in this super crazy high turnover and ability for people to just say, I'm out, to stay with you and to actually build a career with your business? So I'll start with you, Chia. You got any thoughts on that?
I can say in the beginning, we completely failed at onboarding and training. We failed it tanked. So that's where we learned that we needed to spend our time when we were onboarding these new employees that wanted to try us out, switching. And we learned early on that, we were used to that classroom training, bring in a group, sit in a classroom, hold them hostage for a couple hours a day and, send them home. But we didn't have that type of training set up and ready when we went into this new world of virtual learning. So we had to learn and pivot quickly and create engaging training programs to where we didn't have new hires just sitting on a Teams page, just listening to me talk or listening to a trainer talk. So we had to intentionally and purposefully set up hands-on training, video training. Also, it was some of that classroom training, but we had to make it more interactive to where they were able to get up to speed quicker, engage more. So we really, really learned early on and that onboarding had to be strong. In the beginning, we were not getting laptops out on time. We had to get them shipped to a home now. So we had employees hired, but sitting. That's not a good representation of the business that you're about to join. So we really had to improve on that employee onboarding. They needed their tools on day 1. They needed to speak to their leaders and some of their teammates before day 1. So we had to engage different. And we learned that early on. And when we improved on that, we saw results. and people staying on, but we had to continue that process. Once we brought you on, boarded, trained you, we had to stay engaged. How are you doing? We set up mentors, mentor programs. So that level of engagement, y'all, we had to keep them engaged. So mentoring, checking in, coaching, one-on-one sessions, asking how they're doing, how they're feeling, how is it going for them, what do they need, setting up individualized training plans, something that we didn't have before. You either made it or you didn't. But then we created individualized training because now they were learning in a new way. So we saw where that kind of retained employees where it didn't in the beginning, where we were just a little disorganized.
Totally makes sense. A lot of that was just quick action, get in, figure it out, fight the fire. But then now you have to really look at where those gaps were, those voids. So Terrence, you were just like moving in your chair on what you.
Yeah, no, totally in agreement, because the engagement piece is serious. I mean, we certainly had to adjust. I mean, I'll even speak to, I heard something that just made me think about how we had to reevaluate just the recruiting process. I mean, working from home, she said that we're learning different, right? Learning outside of the classroom requires a different skill set. We learned that, right? And so even though the recruitment pool changed, because it changed, we now had to modify, how we are approaching agents. And I think that the tide has started to turn a little bit. We are seeing a better candidate pool, but I think just how we recruit and everything that she stated. I mean, focus groups. I literally did a focus group right before joining this call because it's important to engage agents, right? I mean, I want to understand, what are some of the challenges they're having with what they're working on. And the hardest thing, I think, a lot of times is getting agents to talk to you, tell you honestly what's happening. But when you roll your sleeves back and they know that you're in it to win it with them, right? They will be honest, because listen, we lose together, we win together, and we look crazy together. Looking crazy. So just tell me how I can fix it. Tell me how I can fix it. Going back to what, Chia? Engagement.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, though, goes back to those qualities that people have as leaders, right? And that doesn't mean the role or their position they're in. It's that safe place where someone feels confident and comfortable with the direction that you're giving or the following and the actions that you have and the way you do your craft, right? So that could be just a superstar person that's on the floor, could be a supervisor, manager, whoever it is. But it seems like as career paths move, sometimes we just say, hey, you're a good performer, let's move you up, let's move you to the next place. And it creates this group of haves and have-nots, right? The ones that perform well get to live the good life, those that don't, and hopefully that carrot is enough or the stick is enough, right? That we've talked about. But how do you make it so that when you have rising tides, that all boats move up with it, right? That you don't leave people behind. So those superstars, those people that work well, those leaders, how do you cultivate those and bring up everybody else? Because we talked about before the 80-20, right? You get a lot of your performance out of a smaller group. But guess what? Not all your calls only goes to 20% of your staff. It goes to all your staff. So how do you improve 5%? Little bit across the board around all those people. So there's two big topics there. And I know, Sam, you got some thoughts around that.
Yeah, it's really good feedback. So maybe the way to frame, so many of us were trained in leadership and management around our physical presence, right? It's put a smile on your face when you're going to walk out of the door, engage with people, remember their birthdays, make a comment. It's all around things that were parts of our day, but were reactions to the ability to be there physically and to project the feeling that you wanted in the environment. And now that that's gone, at least for me and some of the people here, we've had a difficulty kind of translating that to the intentional engagement with those that don't see you in the same way. So the ability to walk to the break room and to engage with 7 to 12 employees isn't easily replicated by just dropping into a Zoom and startling somebody who doesn't know if they're in trouble or being recognized. So some of it is just the intentionality of like mirroring previous behaviors to a virtual environment. The weighted performance factor is such an interesting one because our world is different, right? 80% of your production is going to come from your best 20 people. So I think the way we could reframe that is your best 20% aren't ever going to take 80% of the calls, but they can still influence 80% of the engagement across the organization. So those people that used to be kind of the lead in the row need a more intentional way to still lead from their position, which may be the chat, maybe a tip every day, maybe leading a community call, maybe recording a video and telling everybody. So I think they can still have 80% of the influence, just not carry 80% of the volume. They just may be able to still get the rest of the group to pick up 5% as a whole, because those still are the influencers. They still are, they still hold the tribal knowledge. They've still been through the trials and tribulation, but you have to figure out a way to translate that to the new virtual world. Isn't always easy, but certainly has a parallel.
Terrence, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just add that, creating, cultivating, fostering a culture of leadership is extremely important, right? I mean, an environment where people feel they can grow and advance. I mean, I mentioned that at the top of this session, right? I mean, people who feel that they grow, that they have the ability to advance, they are going to work hard for you, specifically you care about them. And you demonstrate that through your honest feedback, through your honest, tough feedback, because feedback is a gift, right? And the truth is not always easy to embrace. But yes, I totally agree with everything that Sam just said.
Chia, I know you got some thoughts on this as well to round it off.
I think, I have to agree with Sam and Terrence. We have to ensure, one, that we're giving our top performers the proper recognition, proper incentives, but then we also have to make sure that we're focusing in on that middle group, that group that can come up and potentially be those top performers. And that can be done through coaching, feedback, opportunity. Give them some of those opportunities that you're just handing up to those top performers. Give them the opportunity to show their skill set and to, really aim to be where that group is, and use those top performers, as Sam said, as mentors. Bring them, let them shadow. You can virtually shadow, guys. Let them shadow. Let them have one-on-one sessions. Let them have mentoring sessions. Turn them into those informal leaders who can bring them along. I do believe in peer-to-peer sessions. I believe that you get more from your agents. They tend to listen to their peers a little bit more. They hold a lot of weight to them than when it's always coming from a leader. So, using that top group, those that are interested in being that mentor, that unofficial leader, I say use them in a different capacity, and it gives them the opportunity to grow and develop another skill set as well.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll add this as well. I mean, I know we're talking about top employees, top performers, but I would challenge us to also reverse engineer that same concept with third and fourth quartile agents. There are leaders in our bottom performers who simply need to be stimulated. They need to be inspired. They need to be motivated. They need to know someone cares, right? And so, yes, I totally agree with everything that's been stated about top performers, but some of that also applies to our bottom, and it's not easily identified, right? Which is why you have to engage and get to know people. That's one thing I'd like to add.
yeah, and I think to just finish that thought up is the not yet group, right? Not the can't, not the won't, not never will be, but not yet, right? And investing in that group of not yets can pay dividends in the long run, right? Because those team members can become extremely loyal people that become pillars of your business going forward. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not part of your superstars either, but it just means that there's a holistic approach, of course, to how you manage things. Now, consideration of time, obviously, and I know we could talk about this forever. There's so many good topics, a lot of good comments, and hopefully we've been addressing them accordingly. I'd love to just finish off with some takeaways, right? For those of you who literally fell asleep for the last 44 minutes and just need the Cliff Notes version, this is for you. Otherwise, hopefully this will round it out for the note takers and the ones that just want to take something good and tangible. So Chia, I'll start with you. If there was just something or some things that were the most important takeaways, what would you say they were for how to affect the link between employee experience and the customer experience?
I would absolutely say, keep your employee in mind, engagement, incentivize, reward and recognition, and, growth opportunities, that those opportunities to engage, communicate how they feel, communicate where they want to go. Engagement for me is just the biggest takeaway. Engage them in as many ways as you can that is positive for them. Ask them how they want to be engaged, and be accountable to yourself to make sure you're doing that for them. And you will definitely see the outcome with your customers.
All right, Sam, you next, bud.
Yeah, I'd say this is, keep in mind, this is a long haul and we're all, guessing as we go, but this isn't one that we're going to be able to squeeze or efficient our way out of, right? We're optimizing for creativity and collaboration, and try things, right? Try, measure, continue to make improvements. But I think the ones who are the most creative and the most diligent at trying new things are the ones in the long run that see the best payoff.
Terrence, got the final word, bud. I left you speechless?
Speechless, man. I'll say people don't know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And that said, you have to lead by example. Set the proper expectations and lead by example. As leaders, for me, I'm a servant leader, man. Right. I'm not looking for anyone to come and rally around me as the leader. Right. I am here to help them to accomplish the goal and get to where they're trying to get to. That's truly why we should be here as leaders. Right. And so they don't care how much we know until we care. And so that's the connection for me and has been for me.
Well, Terrence, Sam, Chia, thank you so much for your time and talking about this super important topic. I'll leave everybody with this thing. 2 words: be curious and care. I think that's what we got out of everything here, is continuously trying to improve, be curious, care about your people, and they'll care about your customers. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your time at the show. Talk to you next time.
Thanks, everybody.